Google Maps might be one of the most popular ways that consumers find information and get directions online. So, of course, Google owns the domain name googlemaps.com, which was created in 2002. But don't be fooled, this is not a domain name for Google Maps. And neither is this. Instead, both of these domain names were held by cybersquatters who just lost decisions under the UDRP, the Uniform Domain Name Dispute Resolution Policy. Hi, it's Doug Eisenberg, and I'm talking today about two UDRP cases that involved what I refer to as lookalike domain names, which, as this label implies, look a lot like trademarks owned by someone else, but contain subtle differences that sometimes make them hard to distinguish, at least at first glance. The first case was a dispute over a domain name that replaced the two-letter O's in Google with two number zeros instead. Google filed a UDRP complaint for this domain name in September 2021, and the forum issued a decision in October 2021. The second case was a dispute over a domain name that simply replaced the first letter G in Google with the letter Q instead. Google filed this UDRP complaint in October 2021, and the forum issued its decision in this case in November 2021. Now, when you look at these domain names here, it might be obvious that they don't actually contain the Google trademark. But often, cybersquatters use lookalike domain names in various ways where consumers aren't paying close attention, such as in links on other websites or in phishing emails. And in those cases, the differences can easily be overlooked. So it's not as if cybersquatters are actually relying on anyone to actually type out these misspelled domain names. And in both cases, it seems like the domain names were used for nefarious purposes. In the case of the domain name with two zeros, the UDRP panelists wrote that the website associated with the domain name is a pay-per-click site with references to Google, Google Maps, and related services, and that the site generates revenue for respondent each time a confused consumer visits the site and clicks on a link. When I visited the website shortly after the UDRP decision was published, I found a page that tried to get me to install a URL safety extension in my web browser, which I didn't do, but apparently would have changed my default search engine, and I'm guessing, at the very least, created a revenue stream for someone else based on my search activity, and perhaps much worse. And in the case of the domain name with the letter Q, the UDRP panelists wrote that it was being offered for sale and that it was also being used to drive traffic to unrelated commercial businesses in a confusing and disruptive manner. I also visited the website associated with this domain name soon after the UDRP decision was issued and discovered a site that generated what looked like a lot of pop-up windows and a so-called Windows Defender Security Center notice urging me to contact Windows support at a phone number that was displayed to me. Of course, I didn't call the number, but I'm sure if I did, I would not have reached anyone at Microsoft or anyone trying to offer me genuine support, and instead I might have been asked to provide a credit card number to solve this fake issue, which surely would have resulted in real troubles. Now, in both of these UDRP cases, the panelists referred to the domain names as being used in connection with typo squatting, which simply describes a domain name that contains a typographical version of a trademark, in this case, the Google Maps trademark, which seems to have been in use since 2005, whereas the disputed domain names in these cases were created in 2007 and 2019. As the panelists said in the UDRP decision for the case involving the letter Q in place of the letter G, typo squatting is an indication of a lack of rights or legitimate interests, and itself is evidence of relevant bad faith registration and use and disruption of the complainant's business. In other words, both of these cases were easy wins for Google, with each resulting in a decision ordering transfer of the disputed domain name. On the first element of the UDRP, whether the domain names were identical or confusingly similar to Google's trademarks, the panel said, as usually happens in cases of lookalike domain names, that visually similar misspellings of a complainant's mark in a domain name do not prevent confusing similarity between that domain name and the complainant's trademark pursuant to the policy. And both the Google and Google Maps marks are clearly recognizable in the disputed domain name. Now, interestingly, the domain name registrants in both cases are not new to the UDRP process. In one case, the panel said that the registrant was a well-known cyber squatter, And in the interest of full disclosure is someone against whom I have filed more than one UDRP complaint myself. And in the other case, the panel said that the registrant had lost at least 2 previous UDRP decisions. Now, this pattern of conduct is something that trademark owners can cite as evidence of bad faith when filing their complaints. And finally, by the way, these 2 cases are not the first cases involving the Google Maps service. Google won a UDRP decision for the domain name googlemap.com, singular, in 2013, for the domain name googlemapsnewyork.com in 2011, and for 21 domain names that contain various versions of the Google Maps trademark in 2013. None of those earlier cases involved lookalike domain names like the 2 I've just been talking about, but the potential for harm is just as clear. In any event, these lookalike domain name disputes should remind trademark owners that there's really no end to the deceptive techniques that cybersquatters will employ. But fortunately, the UDRP is usually a very effective way to deal with them. If you want to learn more about the UDRP, please check out my masterclass on domain name disputes, as well as other resources on my GigaLaw website. And be sure to subscribe to the GigaLaw YouTube channel to be notified of future videos discussing other internet legal issues. Thanks for watching, and see you next time online.